Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Mike Williamson. We're going to talk about a topic I haven't talked about on this show before, mainly what the heck's going on with the Emergencies Act in Canada right now. Mike's going to give us, as a former Canadian, I'm assuming you don't have a, well, maybe you have a passport, but you don't. I mean, you don't have a Canadian citizenship right now.
No, we were landed immigrants. We were legal resident aliens.
Yeah. Okay, but you lived there from age 7 to 11. So if you could kind of start with how did all this start, and then where are we today, and then what the heck is going on?
Yeah, so a brief relevant background for Canada. It's the second largest nation by land area. Bunches of it's not really inhabitable readily. I think 90% of the population is still within 100 miles of the U.S.-Canadian border. So you've got a bunch of urbanites and then a scattering of rural people. You know, I think the population of the Northwest Territory is 35,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
That's technically a territory, not a province. But then you get to Toronto, where Greater Toronto is, several million people. So there's a disparity there, and then most of the population is in Quebec and Ontario. The Maritimes are distinct culture, and then Western Canada is again a distinct culture, and Arctic Canada is a distinct culture, and then you've got Vancouver out there, which is sort of a mishmash.
And then you got Quebec,
and then Quebec, Quebec's weird because, ironically, their language is closer to Old French than modern French is. It's a very Norman. Evolved language, and they very much want to be French, and the French really don't like them. it's a fascinating. And where I lived, I could get Sesame Street in English and Spanish from Buffalo, and English and French on the Canadian side. So I learned bits of all three languages, and then a bit of French in school. You'd have to order meals or cuss at people. And we were close enough to Niagara Falls that we went there 60, 70 times. So it never gets boring. It never gets boring watching 2 million cubic feet of water a second come up the edge. Canada was when we got there, was in the process of developing its healthcare system, which worked very well at the time. And then, as often happens, there is a finite budget, and when you're including a bunch of bureaucrats, it's not necessarily well distributed. They still have exceptional care for emergencies, but for routine stuff, there's huge backlogs and other issues of a social democracy. And so it went along. Then they actually had, in a lot of cases, they were, for example, much later to legalize abortion than the U.S. They've had different issues with Native peoples than the U.S. has, and sometimes worse. And this whole thing that Canadians are so polite. It's like,
it's like the schools, like where the Catholic schools and
which children, never happened. With that incident that was caused
really?
Christopher never actually happened. There is no documentation for it. The tribes insist they're not missing anybody. Yeah, that was somebody threw out on Twitter, which is very good. That's a good point here. That burned 60 churches to the ground. And the government said, Trudeau said, we condemn it, but you kind of understand their anger. Like, no, I'm from Scotland and I don't speak Scottish or Gaelic because the English completely suppressed my culture. That doesn't justify me in burning English churches down.
Right.
It's been they had a certain number of BLM protests and Antifa, less than we did, but they still had some violence. So it's, and the urban areas are always worse. So the last time I saw Toronto, it looked more and more like Chicago, which is not a good look because it had been a very, very pretty town, and then it got to get more and more crowded, gray town. And but the lockdowns there were devastating. So there is, my father would get up in the morning. We had an underground parking garage. He'd drive to the train station, get on a train. The train went into Government Ontario trains. The GO train went into Toronto underneath his office building. And he'd go up to his office, So he didn't see daylight for several months of the year. It was dark when he left in the morning and dark when he came back at night. For example, we lived in a multi-story apartment building. Mississauga is effectively, they don't want to admit it, but they're effectively a suburb of Toronto. The Long Branch Arsenal was about 2 miles from where I lived. And that suburb then, when we got there, was 230,000 people. When we left, it was 350,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And it's now 850,000 people. And this is a suburb. It's nothing but skyscrapers. It's multi-story after multi-story apartment buildings. A modest house on a tiny strip of land is $1 million or more. So you got a lot of people crammed in really close. And the entire underneath, that when they designed the city, they designed a really nice city. Called an architect and designed everything. The entire underneath there is basically a giant shopping mall. The trains come in, and there's shops, there's stands, there's a few venues, there's restaurants, all within walking distance of any of the downtown buildings.
And why is it all underground? Because of the cold, or
that's part of it. I mean, you've got mass transit coming right in, so they put the stuff right there. And then in the winter, you've got cold and snow because you get lake effect snows. We get not deep snows, and that was all shut down. So huge number because it's an enclosed space. It's like, well, yeah, but it's also got tremendous ventilation, which I know something professionally about. With that kind of ventilation, your risk of anything is minimal. But they locked everything down, and all those businesses, most of them tanked. They're gone. I mean, you can't go for 2 years without business.
Yep.
And pay rent. And then the same thing above the surface. So as much as things were hurt here, a lot of areas up there were hurt worse. It was as bad as it would be in New York.
Or where I am in California. Like there's a ton of businesses that are never coming back.
Right. Well, there are everywhere. But I mean, when you have a higher population density, those businesses are more dependent on either foot traffic or, either regular business traffic, which wasn't happening. Out where I am in the country, we expect to drive where we're going. So, it's a lot of those businesses suffered a lot less. And then most of the world is getting rid of the mandates. And, politics aside, if you crunch the numbers, they say that COVID killed 200,000 people in 2020 in the US. That's the revised number. Which you start off with a high estimate, and then they peel off the ones. Well, this guy tested positive, but he had a heart attack.
Right.
So 200,000 divided by 1/3 of a billion is a mortality below 87 thousandths of a percent, which is worse than the flu. But it's not. They were saying 2% and maybe 10%, which it was off by orders of magnitude. And there's people who are still running around in hysteria.
Yeah.
And governments, even Australia is finally starting to loosen some restrictions.
Well, they got rid of their guns in 1996?
Well, that's not. So Australia, since I know that subject in detail, their official estimate was that for 25 million people, they had 2.5 million guns. They registered or accounted for all 800,000 of them, and said their estimates must have been off. So there's a lot of guns there.
Just not legally.
Semi-autos are heavily restricted unless you're a farmer and have to do pest control. They still have lever actions, bolt actions, revolvers. They've got plenty of guns. Same with Canada. There's certain types they don't have. But if you get enough people angry, there's more than enough guns to do the job. But even Australia has realized, and they were trying the concept, so is New Zealand. We're an island, so we'll just shut everything off and we'll be fine. And well, there's been 2 infections in the Antarctic research stations. You can't beat a virus. It's my wife's first degree is epidemiology, and I did hazmat control in the military. You're not going to beat this. You can mitigate individual spread by good sanitation. Avoid people who are runny nosed or sneezing. Don't shake hands if you don't have to. But at some point, it's a disease that's out there, and your odds of getting it are the same, regardless of what you do otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the Queen just got it. She had like a protective bubble around her and all that stuff, right?
She's 95. Yeah. And Trump was in his 70s and survived it. Boris Johnson was in his 70s and survived it. If you've got a bunch of comorbidity, it's absolutely lethal. But if you don't, my wife was in the hospital for a week on oxygen. She's American Indian, so she's susceptible. She's already got a susceptibility to pneumonia, and we'd all gotten through the flu. We just finished all getting through the flu, and then she came down with this as well. But she recovered with a minimal amount of treatment, supplemental oxygen, and they gave her some blood thinners as a precaution, but that was about it.
Okay, so Canada.
Yeah, Canada went completely nuts under Justin Trudeau. All kinds of names for him, which are hilarious. So someone's calling him.
So is Castro his dad or what?
There's one of on the honeymoon tour that Pierre and Margaret took. There's a redacted location, and if you look at the way she looks at Castro in a lot of these photos, the way she talks about him, and how similar it's pretty clear. Yes, that's almost certainly the case, but I mean that shouldn't have any significant effect unless, of course, he worships his dad. But
he might have he might have the genes, right, of a dictator. There might be some tendencies there.
You have to. Yeah, I was like, is this something that can be inherited? Because if so, eugenics for dictators.
No, but part of it's there's heritable traits, right? Like and there's environmental traits. It's just a question of what the proportion is, right?
But he was pushing for this Emergency Powers Act several years ago and got it. So just in case, it's like in case of what? In case Canada's invaded and we have to. Why?
By whom?
By whom? Yeah. Canada's got the greatest defense policy in the world. If you invade Canada, you have to take Quebec. I mean, who wants that? Who's going to invade them? There's lots of oil, there's lots of grain, there's lots of uranium and diamonds, and there's lots of geese and lots of Arctic and lots of wide open space with nothing on it. And then your neighbors with America.
Right. That was my first thought. I mean, that before you went to Quebec, I was like, it's America.
But he was pushing for that, and they had this protest, which wasn't, as far as footprint, wasn't significantly different from other protests. They were they're blocking the streets. Well, so did the
Antifa in the U.S., right?
Yeah, and before that, the Occupy protests.
Right.
And there were BLM protesters handcuffing themselves and blocking highways, not political capitals, because this was the political capital they were blocking. There's people who live there as well, but it's not the same as blocking.
And what was the source of their, like, why were they protesting, and what were they doing as part of the protest?
And of course this gets spun all kinds of ways in the press, but they were protesting the vaccine mandate for crossing the border, and apparently the truckers were required to wear masks in their cabs, which is not conducive to
doesn't make any sense.
Facial coverings are bad for blood flow and oxygen flow. And so they were protesting that, and the fact that the lockdowns have affected them too. And then on a larger scale, there were elements in this country trying to blame the backlog of ships. Oh, well, our truck drivers don't want to transport things. So you're going to blame the truckers who can't transport it until it's unloaded for the fact it's not unloaded.
Right.
So they went in and sat down, and if you look at it, there's bouncy houses and there's barbecues and hot tubs. And why do they have their kids and dogs as shields? It's like, well, if you're going to be gone for 2 weeks, I'd be taking my kids with me. If I had a dog.
Well, and it's not like, are they destroying property at all, or like setting fires or anything like that?
There's always a bad element, but it looks like it's a very, very minimal bad element. I was comparing the George Floyd protests where entire cities got burned down. That had nothing to do with it. I mean, if you're angry, and as a dedicated anarchist-leaning type, if you want to burn down federal buildings and police stations, I won't necessarily support you, but you've picked the right target. You're going after the government who makes all these rules. Okay. You're
not going after somebody who is a private business who had nothing to do with any of this stuff.
But when you're protesting for black rights and you burn down a black-owned liquor store, what have you actually accomplished?
Right.
So they were just sitting there, and apparently Trudeau decided this is the worst threat Canada has ever faced and requires emergency war powers. And the terrifying part is, so they're seizing the assets of all these people, and they're being cheered on in this, except there's no due process. They haven't filed. They don't have a conviction. They haven't filed charges. They don't have a court order. It's not even there's some thinly veiled cases in this country of asset forfeiture where they file charges and then drop the charges, but they haven't even done that. And it's there's people who have similar names have been tagged.
Even though they weren't even at the protest, right?
Or aren't involved. People
Right.
who sent money are having their accounts seized. People who are related to people who sent money are having their accounts seized, because they expressed an opinion that Trudeau doesn't like.
Roughly how many people do you think have been targeted?
There's been several hundred have certainly been public about it. And of course, in some cases, there may be some other reason the government's going after them too. People always love to say, I'm being repressed when, well, they actually are a criminal. But, most of these people, they were donating money to help the truckers, pay their bills while they went and said, some attention here. Quite a few of the local businesses opposed it. Quite a few of the local businesses supported it. And, they were selling coffee, they were selling food.
Aren't they getting targeted? Like those
Yep.
businesses that just stayed open.
When the coffee shops you were selling coffee to these people who were protesting. Yeah, I'm a coffee shop.
We were selling coffee to everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
There was related to there's something else. And then there was an issue with so they tried to get tow truck drivers to go in and tow them, and the heavy recovery drivers refused. And this was being painted as, well, they've been threatened. Well, no, but the government wants to hire them right now to tow this truck once. Over the next 10 years, that driver might need 4 or 5 tows, and he ain't going to hire the bastard to tow him out of the protest. It's like,
well, that's part of what the Emergencies Act requires. Like the government can literally order you to tow other people or to do stuff to do things. I don't know if they pay you or not, but
they were saying they were going to pay them, and then that was the excuse. Well, they're going to pay them, so it's perfectly okay. Like, well, so if you insist that a prostitute has to perform an act on you, but you'll pay her, it's still wrong. People have agency to decide what they want to do. Unless they're a slave.
Yeah.
You can't order someone to do something. That's
Yeah, you can. I mean, it's easier to order somebody not to do something.
Yeah.
Right, which is a negative. I forget the difference between positive and negative rights, but you can't force. Yeah, you can't force somebody to do something like that's indentured servitude, effectively.
Yeah. I was glad to see the Mounties overall have a phenomenal reputation for policing. They've always been exemplary, and someone got a screenshot of several of them cheering on the woman who got trampled by a horse, who is alive. She didn't die, but she was a tribal elder for the Mohican tribe, I think. And she's on a walker. The horses were going through. People on walkers can't move very quickly. The horse realized it was stepping on something and took pressure off, so she didn't get hurt badly. But there were people cheering that it was a great thing that tribal elders were being trampled by horses for daring to protest the prime minister. And there was someone got a screenshot from a chat room that had RCMP officers in it gloating about how great it was. A friend of mine is a retired Mountie. Apparently, they're being officially reprimanded, which basically means they're likely to be fired. Even the perception that if these things happen, it's unfortunate. If it's necessary, they have procedures, and none of them should be glorifying violence. So it looks like they're trying to maintain their standards, but when at this point the prime minister has de facto dictatorial power, he can say this person's a problem, seize their bank account, cut off their insurance, take their professional license, and everyone who's involved with them.
Does he not realize that people behave in very different ways when you take away anything for them to?
He grew up a spoiled little brat, so I doubt it. But his personality is it's textbook narcissistic. It's all about him, and he doesn't have a comprehension of how to back off. It's like the culture of the Imperial Japanese in World War II. There is no concept of retreating or surrender. All he can do is escalate, and eventually.
What are the people around him doing? Like, are there people in the Canadian government are cheering this on?
Apparently, the NDP, and the New Democratic Party, and the Liberals supported it enough to vote for it 55% in Parliament.
Do these people not realize that? Do these people not realize that? Do these people not realize when there's a change in power that those same powers can be invoked against folks on the other side of the aisle?
They should, but most people are just apparently not that bright.
And do they also not realize that they, by like freezing bank accounts and things like that, you could, it's unlikely, but you could.
We haven't seen semi versus police car at this point.
Yeah.
Although it's not impossible, you'll see that roadside. Oh, I slipped on the wheel. Slam.
Well, are these people going to get their access to their bank accounts back? Is it just they just froze because they donated, or is there a quid pro quo?
No, I don't know the details of that, but it's even worse. I said an asset forfeiture here, where they seize your assets, so you can't get a lawyer. But on paper, you're worth X amount of money, so they won't provide you a lawyer. So how do you get a lawyer? So it has. I've seen commentary on a lot of the preparedness forums. There's bunches of people. Canada had a brief actual run on the banks. There's bunches of people in a lot of countries are now drawing out cash and keeping cash on hand.
Yeah, I mean, look, the moment I see that in the United States, I don't care if they're doing it to Antifa, right? Like, I'm taking my money out, putting it elsewhere.
Yeah. Like, and if they seize like your investments and that, say, how do you get it back? Even if they admit they were wrong at some point, good luck with that. How do you actually get back all that type of stuff?
Well, it's also destabilizing. Like, they're destabilizing their own economy and their government.
They were demanding one of the processors for cryptocurrency give them a list of
I've seen that.
And they're going, we don't know. We're just an exchange point.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, they should, I mean, it could have been a 4-word sentence. Mm-hmm. That is the point. Mm-hmm. Right? That's why cryptocurrency exists.
There's no society that does not have a government, although I would argue that most government functions are not necessary and can be done, without the morass of a bureaucracy that has a delay time before it can issue a ruling. But more and more, we're seeing things that are being taken over by the private sector, by individual development, and the more the bureaucrats are threatened by having their jobs removed, the harder they are fighting to keep them. You will have a government. I don't need a government to do that for me. And it's there was a large rural versus urban component to the American Revolution, but of course these days the majority of people are urban, and in Canada, it's massive. So I don't know if there's mumbles about Western provinces seceding, but I don't think that's going to happen. For one thing, they're landlocked.
Right.
They've got the U.S. on the south, and then they've got Canada around them. But it's certainly creating a lot of unrest. I was actually surprised several of the provinces rolled back their restrictions, including Quebec. I figured they'd be the last one to roll it back, but they went ahead and rolled back a lot of their restrictions. And they've had several issues with public health care previously, so they were trying to say that if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't get health care.
Oh, that's Hippocratic oath through and through.
Right. Well, they previously had a lawsuit where, because of the delay times in non-emergent surgery, gentlemen who had money just wanted to pay a doctor out of pocket. And the provincial government tried to say he couldn't, that he didn't have the right to seek health care at his own expense. And their provincial court ruled, of course he does. If he can just pay someone to perform surgery, he can pay. That's fine.
Right.
But they actually had a debate over whether or not you're entitled to get your own health care once the government has control of it. I mean, this debate should never take place.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was the spark that caused him to invoke the Emergencies Act? Like, what?
I mean, I guess it was so the previous protest of the churches, which shouldn't have been burned, Antifa, and a lot of Antifa's issues might have been resolved if people had talked to them sooner. Mm-hmm. I'm not in any way endorsing the murders, the rapes, the arson, everything else, But at the same time, if you start engaging this with someone, you got them busy.
Well, but Mike, they don't exist.
I know,
but they don't exist, Mike.
Right, I know. Yeah, the Antifa is just an idea. Yeah, yeah. There's no.
How are you going to talk to Eisenhower? He's dead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And but yeah, he refused. He met with them. He met with other groups, and then this group he just fled for his $8 million cabin in the. More than $8 million cabin on the lake. Of course, being on a lake in Ontario is not very hard. But,
wait, so he's basically secluded himself now, or
he did? He secluded himself then, and then there was even I was watching some of the Parliament feeds. It was like, we need you to come up and answer these questions. Yeah, whether we like your answer or not, you're the prime minister. You have to answer the questions. This is your job. But he seems to be very dictatorial minded. That's what he wants to do.
How does that the Emergencies Act work? Is he the only one who can invoke it, or does he need consent from other people in the government?
Consent within a week, and he actually had Parliament blocked for a day, but they voted to support him. So this emergency of truckers, parking in the Capitol is so desperate that they can't use any kind of less aggressive means.
How long do you think this thing's going to last?
Forever. I mean, once the government's got power, it never. So we got rid of Saddam Hussein. We got rid of Al Qaeda, including Osama bin Laden. We still have the Patriot Act. We're still fighting a war on terror. We've been fighting a war on drugs basically as long as I've been alive. I'm concerned that the war on COVID in this country will never end. The only thing that stops it is when there is a dramatic change either in the culture or in the government. Mm-hmm. Basically, something I pointed out, people, especially in Europe, talk about how young the U.S. is, and our country's been around forever. Like, well, every country in Europe has a new constitution since World War II. Every single one of them. The UK's Union Act is 1801. The US Constitution was ratified in 1793. Right now, the US is the oldest extant government. Every other nation has had a new government in that time frame. And I think whether it's a positive change or not, they're different than what they were 200 and odd years ago.
I think what's going to happen is in the next set of elections in each of these countries, including our own, whatever party's in power is not going to be the party in power after that election.
You'd hope so, but there's always people who either are easily panicked, easily persuaded, or enjoy the jackboot. They want the government to have more power. My eldest daughter and I, she was a teenager at the time, did a demonstration at a convention on government control versus the free market. They were doing live action Frogger. If you remember the Frogger video game, the frog trying to
crossing the road. Yeah.
They had taped out lines. I've got video, and they had people walking back and forth as singles and in groups as cars and trucks. And then blindfolded person is the frog, and someone is shouting instructions to them, left, right, forward, back, to get them. And the trucks will change speed, just like they would in the video game. And how far does a person hop before they get squashed by a truck?
Probably not very far.
Right? Left, forward, right, back, crunch. Now, if the person playing the frog takes their mask off and just walks across the board, there's literally no issue whatsoever.
Right, because they are making decisions for themselves as opposed to listening to other people.
It's a gross comparison.
Right,
but the person right there right now can make a decision, whereas the person back there, one doesn't. There's the man in the loop delay, as the decision making delay. And just like we discussed for drone warfare or RPV warfare for the military, you got speed of light lag if you're using satellites. Mm-hmm. You got decision making errors. You may not have all sensory input versus someone who's actually flying the craft. And the same thing with any kind of political activity. One of the things I'm going to go ahead and support was moving the Department of Agriculture out to Kansas City, and all these poor bureaucrats are going to have to leave DC. Yeah, relocation is a fast life in business.
Well, even like even the Germans, even the Germans in World War II, like they had a philosophy called Auftragstaktik, which was take away all the biases. Is it would empower the junior officer on the spot, on the like closest to the action, to make decisions.
And the U.S. has always had that on paper. The U.S. military has always had that on paper, and that was something the Germans complained about. Was they followed their doctrine, and the U.S. had doctrine, and it wasn't clear that anyone cared about the doctrine,
right?
Obeyed the doctrine, or was called to account if they violated the doctrine. More like guidelines.
Exactly.
Lieutenant could go, well, we're not going to do that right now. We're going to do this. And then Patton was famous for open-ended orders. In the absence of other authority, find something to attack and destroy it. We're destroying the enemy. So if no one's told you to do anything else, you see some enemy, destroy them.
Pretty simple. Pretty simple. But like the decentralization definitely.
It is very much decentralization versus centralization of authority with the government. The anti-federalists would have been horrified at what they see. They'd ask us why we weren't already shooting. Some bureaucrat can tell you what to do with your land.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Well,
and in fact, we referenced in our short story where the EPA halted a military exercise. That was actually from real life put into fiction. The EPA halted a military exercise with expensive multi-million-dollar aircraft and training time because there was an endangered white whooping crane on the flight line. So all air operations had to suspend.
So I was at the National Training Center. If you ran over a desert tortoise, everything stops. $10,000 fine, investigation. They had a little turtle fence where you had like the extended underground to prevent these desert tortoises from coming on. So
it's a pint of gasoline on the ground. Now we have to dig a cubic meter of dirt out because of contamination.
Oh yeah.
Especially in the Middle East. I every time I went to the Middle East, I was snarking. It's like, what's it going to do? Contaminate the oil? This whole part of the world floats on oil. You spilled some oil on the ground, and it will contaminate what? The oil.
I think we were a little okay with oil, like a little bit of oil, but you spill, like you had a fuel spill.
Yeah,
you're digging.
Oh no, either. Any fuel. The paper, the paperwork I did for accounting for all this hazmat, including things like refrigerant and solvents, and there's the CB showed up and did us a favor of giving us a bunch of refrigerant they didn't need, including some R11, which hasn't been legal for use in a couple of decades, 3 decades now, I guess. I had to do the paperwork to dispose of it. They gave it to us as a gift. That's
very nice of them. That's very nice of them.
Yeah.
All right, so going back to Canada, I think we're already like 8 minutes over your time.
Yeah, we can wrap this up here.
So with regards to Canada, what do you think is going to happen going forward? Like, what's your projection?
There will obviously be a pushback, but when it's at this point, literally, Trudeau could look at a letter to the editor in the newspaper and go, "Well, this person is helping the opposition seize their assets." He has the authority to do that. He was claiming that the members of parliament who voted against it were anti-government. They don't trust the government to make decisions. Well, no, they are the government trying to make a decision. What you mean is they don't trust you to make the decision. So what you're saying is, l'État, c'est moi. I am the state. How dare they not let me make this decision? Well, they're a legislature. But we had that here with the governor of Michigan, the governor of Washington, the governor of Oregon.
Pennsylvania, like they made changes to their election laws. Like the Secretary of State did without.
Well, I'm talking about the COVID restrictions. The legislature can't meet. This is too important for the legislature to get involved. Like, well, I voted for my legislature. I've talked to my legislature. They understand what I need on a smaller local basis. And they will vote and decide. We're one of the states where they took the governor's power away from him. He claimed it was unconstitutional for the legislature to change the law, and sued in court and lost. And that it was a violation of my freedom for them to vote on something rather than
it's almost as if, like, we frequently talk about, like, in geopolitics, gray zone warfare, right?
Mhm.
This is like the domestic equivalent of gray zone politics, where
Yeah.
they just do things. Politicians, and I'm not pointing at any particular side, but politicians will just take it as far as they can, sometimes just
Oh, sure.
going right through what
I
the laws say, and then say, challenge me.
It's one of those big picture versus small picture things. I could look at a picture like this. If you put me in charge as dictator, I could fix most of these problems.
Yeah.
But would anyone like my fix?
Some people might.
Not.
You might enrich some people, but other people are going to hate you, right?
Oh, yeah, enriching people's not part of it, but yeah, it's like, yeah, I it's not entirely a joke, but I've pointed out for a lot of issues, I have the violence first policy. If you identify the problem and commit violence early on, you don't have to commit more violence later.
Right.
If someone had identified Hitler properly in 1933 and shot him, there'd be other issues. But very likely you would have avoided the death camps and a massive scale war.
Well, we avoided millions of casualties in Japan by maximum violence with the 2 atomic bombs.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. There's people who argue that, but yeah, if you look at the Japanese documentation from the time, they were willing to fight. They were arming 12-year-old schoolgirls with sharpened stakes. That's how far they were willing to fight. Bang. Are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And any number of a boxing match. If there's a knockout in the first round, you don't have to have 8 more rounds.
Yeah, you might avoid some long-term brain injuries too, right?
Right. Yeah. To you, yeah. His
right.
are his problem. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy to, at some level, to fix problems when you have ultimate authority. But at the same time, do you have all the information available? Right. What is the outcome of that? And how is that going to affect, the whole point of constitutional government is that people don't have unlimited power for those reasons.
Yeah, I think dictators are certainly much more efficient and certainly better at short-term decision-making. Mm-hmm. But I think democracies or republics, which is kind of what the US really is, are much more effective at, they might be chaotic and unstable in terms of getting to good short-term decisions, but in the long run, they tend to coalesce toward the right thing for the greatest number, for the greater good. Whereas dictatorships tend to over time, they might do things for the greater good in the beginning, but at the end of the day, it becomes all about the cult of personality and solving the dictator's whims. Right.
So to wrap up for Canada, I mean, either there's going to be more and more basically just civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. For example, if they take all those donations and the truckers just stay home for a month and don't deliver anything,
it'll cripple the economy.
Yeah, very quickly.
And if they don't have access to money, why wouldn't they do that?
Right. Why should they go out and get harassed, insulted, do hard work, and be accused of being the problem when they can just sit home?
I mean, he literally gave them nothing to lose. They already lost everything.
And if the government, if he won't let them do that, there's no reason for some of them not to start committing violence. What else are they going to do?
Well, that's the thing. They don't even need to commit violence. Like if he expects them to work, they don't have access to their own money
or their own vehicles at this point.
He's the one who's going to have to commit violence to get them to move. And
that's the other possible outcome. Otherwise, within short term, Parliament can rein him in and say, okay, that's over. That was, you've accomplished what you needed to. You cleared the town. It's over.
Will they?
But will they? And will he abide by that when they do it? Or will he try and invoke it again? We had states here where they were invoking emergency acts 30 days apart, every 30 days. Endless emergency until legislatures or courts finally called them out. And we had the issue of there's several judges who punted and wussed out, and it's like, well, it's not up to the courts to question the government. Like, no, that's literally your job, sir. That's literally why you are in the position you have, is to question everything and go, so here's the limits of your power, the authorization of your power.
Yeah, it's do your job. Do your job.
All right. Well, it's going to be bad for Canada economically. It already is. It's going to be, hopefully it can be resolved peacefully and they realize it was a mistake and don't cross that line again. But historically,
Canada generally does the right thing. Like they're much more they're less unruly than us Americans are. We're a little unruly.
Again, when everyone talks about how peaceful Canadians are, I have two words: ice hockey.
Well, that's how they get it out. If they didn't have ice hockey.
Canadians are not nice people. I got bullied a lot more in Canada than I did in the U.S. So
interesting.
Yeah, they're nice to a point, and and then they stop being nice. But
all right, my friend.
Hopefully it all works out, and we'll see.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out. And thanks for giving me giving me and the audience a good primer on exactly what's going on. Because like I said, I just check and I'm like, whoa, wait, what? They seized assets and bank accounts? Like, wait, what? It went from like 0 to $1 million in 2.1 seconds
without court orders and the people who they thought were involved, whether or not they were. Well, Freddie and I are working on another future war story for you. So it should be.
I'm looking forward to it.
It gives us a chance to get all our.
Especially since there's an element of China in it.
Yes.
All right, my friend.
China, the Olympics could be another episode.
All right, my friend. Always good talking to you. Talk to you soon.
Later.